Thanks for staying with us today. I'm Doug Reardon.
And I'm Annie Satowski. The polls were off big time in 2016, and even this year, some of the margins aren't quite matching up.
Yeah, so are Americans losing faith in polling numbers? One expert says even if they were a little off this year and last, you should definitely not be losing faith in them.
Kind of like a recipe, you have to get the proportions of the ingredients correct.
And University of Michigan political science professor Mike Traugott says pollsters may have burnt the batch a bit with this year's poll numbers, especially in the Midwest. While Michigan's numbers actually weren't too bad, other regional states like Wisconsin, Ohio, and Iowa were off each by about as much as 7 points in favor of Joe Biden. Nationally, Biden's lead extended to as high as 8 points in the weeks ahead of the election. As counting continues, it's currently around 3. And in key Republican states like Montana and Indiana, most major polls had Trump's lead in the single digits, whereas on election night, it was a blowout. Traugott thinks it has to do with a few things.
It turns out they have the same problem. That is probably too many Democrats in their sample or in their likely voter models.
Traugott says most quality polls are still conducted over the phone, and while pollsters typically have no issue getting more progressive city and suburban voters to pick up the call.
It could be that Republicans have become less willing to be interviewed, and that is one reason for their underrepresentation in the samples.
And some major polling sites like 538 did say an inability to contact registered Republican voters in rural areas threw off the sample. They, Gallup, and Michigan-based pollsters Epic MRA all declined an interview for this story. The passage of Prop 3 in 2018, making it easier for anyone to get a ballot, may have also shaken up the numbers of active voters in each party. And along those lines, Traugott says there's another ingredient pollsters couldn't possibly have factored for.
We had the highest turnout ever in an American election. And we had a change in voting methods with so many people, probably more than 60% voting early before Election Day.
Traugott also thinks that Biden's lead approaching Election Day may have invigorated more of the president's supporters to vote on November 3rd. He says despite some key states being off, Americans shouldn't lose faith in polls, even if they do become a bit more wary in an election year.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think, would be a terrible mistake from a Democratic perspective, especially in the period between elections, because the measurement of public attitudes and beliefs and policy preferences is important for communicating to their elected representatives about what their preferences are.